Harriet Greenwood had once believed her life was complete. She and her husband James had spent decades in their small coastal town, building the two-story home where they had planned to retire together. James had poured his heart into every detail of their house, from the sturdy oak front door to the wildflower garden in the backyard teeming with vibrant poppies and whenever neighbors asked, James would grin and say, "This home is for my Harriet, so she'll always know she is loved and sheltered." But when James died unexpectedly 3 years ago, Harriet found herself with a large, empty house, a broken heart, and little else. She wandered the hushed rooms in the gray hours before dawn, trailing her fingers along the wallpaper, still half expecting to hear James's booming laugh echoing off the walls. Days passed into months, and months slipped into years. Instead of stirring with the lively energy that had once defined their marriage, the home felt as if it were losing its color and warmth. She tried to keep busy by volunteering at the local library and delivering meals at the senior center. She'd chat politely with friends and neighbors, trying to ignore their sympathetic gazes. Yet each night she returned to her quiet home, sat alone at the kitchen table, and stared at the single-place setting. A persistent ache weighed on her chest as she recalled the joyous, chaotic dinners she and James once hosted. It was a foreign notion, a life once brimming with laughter, now reduced to the tick-tick of the kitchen clock. The loneliness became familiar, like a thread woven through each passing day, reminding her of James's absence and her own unspoken longing. One day, after finishing her volunteer shift at the library, Harriet walked to the back of the building where the children's reading section bustled with giggles and the excited rustle of turning pages. She passed a cluster of children gathered around a young woman who introduced herself as a foster care advocate. Harriet paused, curiosity piqued, and listened from a distance. The woman explained how many children in their county were without stable homes, waiting for families to give them a safe place to live. They had children of all ages, she said, children who longed for belonging and craved love. Harriet found herself inching closer, her heart beating a little faster at the thought. She didn't know why, but something in the woman's gentle tone drew Harriet in. At the end of the presentation, Harriet reached for the pamphlet stacked neatly on a side table and slipped one into her purse. That evening, Harriet found herself leafing through the pamphlet at her kitchen table. The words temporary home, unconditional support, and chance for healing leapt out at her like beacons in a storm. She recalled her own experience of heartbreak and the patience James had shown her when they were young, and she wrestled with doubt. Could she now be that harbor for a child adrift in the foster care system? The idea was daunting, but beneath her fear lay a spark of excitement. She was, after all, a caregiver at heart, despite the heartbreak she still carried. Alone in her living room, Harriet studied the photographs in the pamphlet, tiny black and white pictures of smiling children who'd been adopted or fostered. Some of them had come from difficult circumstances, but had blossomed when offered a stable, loving home. Harriet closed her eyes for a moment, imagining the footfalls of small feet up and down the stairs, the squeals of laughter in the hallways, the hush of bedtime stories in the living room. Her breath caught in her throat. It felt so vivid. She envisioned the empty bedrooms upstairs no longer being places collecting dust and memories, but instead filled with cozy blankets, colorful posters, and the liveliness of childlike wonder. The next week, Harriet called the number on the pamphlet. She found herself speaking softly, as though worried someone else might overhear her sudden idea. The social worker, a kind-hearted woman named Felicia, asked Harriet a few questions about her age, her home, and her experience with children. Harriet confessed she had no children of her own and that her life had been rather quiet since James passed. Felicia's tone softened with understanding. She mentioned programs that trained older adults to be foster parents, ensuring they had the resources and support they needed. Gently, Felicia explained there would be interviews, inspections, background checks, some red tape to navigate. Harriet's heart fluttered with nerves and hope. She agreed to the process, feeling a renewed sense of purpose stir within her. Within a month, Harriet's once still household was filled with new energies. She welcomed her first placements, two siblings named Leo and Ava. The foster system had plucked them out of a neglectful environment And though they rarely spoke about it, Harriet recognized the haunted look in their eyes. It was the same look she saw in herself each morning, the gaze of someone who knew loss and was still coping with the lingering ache. Leo was 8, short for his age, with freckles dotting his nose. Ava was 10, tall and lanky and more guarded. Harriet tried to make them feel at home, pointing out their rooms, showing them where they could store their clothes, and indicating which shelves in the kitchen were filled with snacks. She painted their rooms in bright colors, mint green for Ava and a shade of cheerful yellow for Leo. Every day she discovered the small, subtle ways they tested her love, leaving cups on tables to see if Harriet would get angry, or making small messes to gauge how she'd respond. And each time, Harriet calmly reassured them, letting them know it was all right, guiding them gently on how to pick up after themselves. Though she knew fostering meant temporary care, Harriet also knew that for as long as they stayed, she had a chance to be the safe place they needed. It was not always smooth sailing. Sometimes Leo had nightmares, and Harriet would press a glass of water into his shaky hands and rub his back until he calmed down. Ava, on the other hand, had a sharper, more distant air. She seldom engaged in small talk, preferring to retreat to her room, her face buried in a book. Harriet respected Ava's boundaries, offering an empathetic ear without forcing her to open up. At mealtimes, Harriet tried to share small tidbits of her day, hoping it would encourage conversation. Occasionally, a flicker of curiosity lit Ava's eyes, but she rarely spoke much. Harriet understood she couldn't rush the process or push the children to trust her too early, so she let it unfold at its own pace, reminding herself that trust was a gift earned over time. As the months passed, Harriet found that having Leo and Ava around awakened in her a sense of joy she hadn't felt since James's passing. She began cooking larger dinners, spaghetti with meatballs, roasted chicken with vegetables, homemade pies for dessert. She taught the children small chores like washing the dishes and folding laundry, and was surprised at how proud Leo looked when he completed a task with care. Their presence in the house gave Harriet's days a purposeful rhythm, one that lured her out of bed each morning with a sense of anticipation. She no longer mourned James in the early hours. Instead, she prepared breakfast for her 2 new charges, ensuring they started their day with a hot meal and a few encouraging words. One Saturday, Harriet suggested a trip to the beach. James, an avid fisherman, had once taught Harriet the fundamentals of casting a line. Harriet remembered the serenity of staring out at the endless horizon, the whoosh of the wind across her cheeks, the tang of salt in the air. Now she hoped Leo and Ava might appreciate the same calming beauty. When they arrived at the shore, Ava hung back, arms folded. Leo darted straight toward the water's edge, letting the foamy waves lap at his sneakers. Harriet motioned for Ava to join them. After a hesitant moment, Ava sighed and trudged closer, keeping as much distance as possible from Harriet while still watching her brother. With gentle patience, Harriet set up a blanket in the sand, then coaxed Ava with a soft voice. "I know it might seem silly," Harriet said, "but you might feel better if you wiggle your toes in the wet sand. It's like letting the ocean massage your feet." Ava gave her a skeptical look, but sat down on the edge of the blanket. Leo, however, was quick to oblige, howling in delight when a cold wave washed over his ankles. Gradually, the tension around Ava's eyes began to ease. Harriet watched Ava rub the sand between her fingers, a faint flicker of curiosity in her gaze. They spent a few hours chasing the surf, collecting shells, and munching on sandwiches Harriet had packed. By the time they drove back, the siblings were dozing in the back seat, lulled by sun and sea air. Harriet realized her cheeks hurt from smiling so much. She silently thanked James for gifting her with the knowledge of this peaceful pastime, wishing he could share her proud and happy moment. Not long after, the social worker called Harriet about a short-term placement for a teenage girl named Daniela Danny for short, who needed emergency accommodation. Apparently, Danny had bounced between homes for over a year. She was 15, quick-witted, and struggling with her anger in ways an overburdened system could not fully address. Harriet agreed to take Danny in, though Felicia warned her it might not be easy. Danny can be moody, and she's had some run ins with the law, Felicia explained. But she's bright, and I think if she finds a consistent, loving environment, you might see her true self. When Danny arrived, she slouched in the doorway, clutching a small duffel bag. Her hair was dyed black at the tips, and she wore dark eyeliner that made her gaze intense. Harriet smiled warmly, offering to help carry her bag, but Danny pulled away. I got it, she mumbled, stepping inside as though prepared to bolt at any second. Harriet guided her upstairs to a small, tidy bedroom. We can decorate it however you like, Harriet offered. Danny shrugged, gave the room a cursory glance, and then shut the door. Harriet lingered outside, wondering how she could connect with this withdrawn teenager. But Harriet remembered how Ava had been similarly walled off at first, and how gentle patience had slowly worn down the distance. She resolved to offer Danny the same steady calm. Over the next few weeks, Harriet saw glimpses of Danny's vulnerability. She had a gift for art, often doodling in a sketch pad she carried around. One night, Harriet was closing up the house when she noticed Danny sitting on the front porch, flowers overhead nodding in the soft breeze. Curiously, Harriet peered over her shoulder. Danny was sketching the wildflowers that grew along the garden fence. At first, Danny bristled, but Harriet simply said, "They're lovely," and stayed quiet afterward, letting Danny draw in peace. Slowly, Danny relaxed, continuing to fill the page with delicate lines. Harriet felt a wave of empathy for this girl who had already learned to hide her hopes and fears behind a tough exterior. By granting her the freedom to be herself, Harriet hoped Danny would start to feel that this was a home, if only temporarily. Balancing the needs of three aspiring hearts wasn't always straightforward. Leo sulked on days he missed his birth parents and lashed out by kicking a ball against the garden fence until Harriet was forced to reprimand him. Ava would retreat to her room for hours, sometimes ignoring dinner, especially on days she had therapy sessions that dredged up painful memories. Danny would say stinging things about this fake family, only to apologize later in a halting mumble. Through it all, Harriet's compassion remained constant. She reminded each child in subtle ways that they were cared for and valued regardless of outbursts or withdrawn behavior. The turning point came one chilly October evening. A storm raged outside, thunder shaking the window panes. Leo and Ava huddled in the upstairs hallway, quietly unnerved by the claps of thunder. Danny was alone in her bedroom, blasting music through her earbuds to drown out the storm. Suddenly, a loud crash resounded from outside as the wind flung a tree branch against the side of the house. Terrified, Leo scampered to Harriet's bedroom and pounded on the door. Harriet, roused from her restless half-sleep, ushered him in, comforting him with the same tender reassurance she always gave. Ava peered in the doorway, uncertain if she was allowed to join. Harriet opened her arms wide, and Ava crept close on the bed, trembling slightly. Then came Danny, shoulders tense, face pale, eyes flicking nervously. She didn't say anything, but quietly lingered in the doorway, as if unsure where she belonged. Harriet patted the space beside her. "Come on, Danny," she said gently, making room on the bed. "We might as well stick together through this storm." With an awkward shrug, Danny set aside her guarded pride and took a seat at the foot of the bed. The four of them stayed up for over an hour, listening to the howling wind, exchanging quiet conversation. Harriet told them stories about her own childhood, how she had once been deathly afraid of thunderstorms until her mother taught her to count the seconds between lightning flashes and thunderclaps. "It helped me realize the storm wouldn't last forever," she explained, smiling gently. In that simple, tender moment, something shifted. Getting through that storm together bridged the invisible distances between them. Leo soon fell asleep, his head on Harriet's lap. Ava, lulled by the stories, drifted off next to him. Danny's eyes remained open, but her posture softened. Harriet gave Danny a reassuring smile, feeling a swell of maternal protectiveness for this girl who had seen too much heartache. The morning brought calmer skies and, along with them, a sense of familial closeness. Harriet felt it in the way Ava lingered by the stove, making small talk about the weather, and in how Leo spontaneously hugged Harriet around the waist. Even Danny managed a fleeting smile when Harriet mentioned that scrambled eggs were ready. It was as if the storm had bound them together in an unspoken pact of trust. Though Harriet knew she was just a chapter in these children's lives, she wanted to provide them with something lasting, a memory that could anchor them whenever they faced uncertainty. She dug through the attic and found James's old Polaroid camera, the one he used to document their early road trips. She proposed taking pictures, one for her and one for each child. At first, Leo and Ava were confused by the bulky vintage camera, and Danny pretended to find the idea silly, but they all acquiesced when Harriet stood them before the fireplace mantel, lined up with a sense of ceremony. When Harriet snapped the Polaroid, the children flinched at the bright flash and the mechanical whir. They watched in fascination as the muted gray squares slowly developed into colorful images of themselves. Harriet labeled each photo with the date and an anecdote. First family photo, she wrote in neat cursive at the bottom. She gave each child their own copy so they would remember the day. It was a small gesture, but the children's eyes lit with quiet excitement, as though she'd passed on a secret key to a hopeful future. Time flowed, bringing new rhythms and challenges. Danny started opening up about her passion for art, showing Harriet sketches she had made. Some were dark and moody, reflective of her guarded soul, while others were stunning depictions of flowers, sunsets, and fleeting human expressions. Eva, encouraged by Harriet, joined a local soccer club and found a sense of belonging among teammates who cheered her on. Leo enrolled in a martial arts program at the community center, channeling the frustration and confusion of his past into disciplined movements. And every evening, Harriet gathered them around the kitchen table for dinner. They shared highlights of their day, even if a highlight was as trivial as "I found a quarter on the sidewalk." The home was filling with giggles, arguments, apologies, and all the small, beautiful marks of a living, breathing family. Inevitably, the time came when the system found a permanent placement for Leo and Ava. The news was bittersweet. Harriet was overjoyed they'd be adopted by a caring couple who genuinely wanted them both. But a sharp pang of sadness struck her at the thought of the children leaving to start their new life. The night before they left, Harriet prepared a special dinner: roast turkey with stuffing, mashed potatoes, and fresh green beans. She layered a rich chocolate cake for dessert. Leo's eyes bulged with delight at the feast, and Ava gave a rare, unguarded smile. Danny hovered in the background, her arms crossed, expression difficult to read. Harriet suspected that part of Danny's aloofness was her own way of handling the impending changes. Once the meal was done and the dishes were cleared, Harriet gave each child a small box containing a keepsake. For Leo, it was an illustrated book about constellations, and for Ava, a journal with thick pages perfect for writing or drawing. They both thanked Harriet, awkward with the gravity of the moment, but clearly touched by the gesture. When Harriet took Leo and Ava to meet their new family the next afternoon, the goodbyes were heartfelt. Leo cried, clinging to Harriet, and Ava pressed her lips together, determined not to show tears, but the trembling in her voice betrayed her emotions. Harriet pulled them both into a gentle embrace. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, kissing the tops of their heads. "Remember, my door is always open for you." Their new family, an older couple named the Hendersons, thanked Harriet for the care she'd provided, promising to keep in touch. Harriet watched them drive off, feeling the ache of loss, but also an odd peace. She had fulfilled her role in their journey, given them a safe harbor, and guided them toward a brighter future. In the quiet weeks that followed, Harriet and Danny lived together like two companions who understood each other's hesitations. Danny's permanent placement was still pending, so Harriet continued to care for her, forming a daily bond that neither of them spoke openly about, but both deeply felt. Danny's attitude had softened considerably, and she even asked Harriet for help preparing for a school art contest. One evening, Harriet found a half-finished portrait in Danny's open sketchbook. Harriet's face, rendered in delicate pencil strokes, lines crinkling near the eyes to capture her gentle warmth. Harriet's throat constricted with emotion, realizing that Danny had allowed her into her heart in ways she didn't articulate with words. As the seasons turned, Harriet realized something extraordinary. Her house no longer felt empty. Memories of James still filled the corners, his fishing rods in the garage, the rocking chair on the porch where he sipped iced tea. But these memories were woven together with the new love and life the children had brought. Harriet recognized that her pain and her passion could coexist. each making her life more precious. By opening her heart to these foster kids, Harriet had discovered a renewed sense of meaning, one that honored James's legacy of warmth and generosity. When Danny's social worker called to say a group home had an opening, Danny chose to stay with Harriet instead, at least until a more permanent family arrangement arose. The group home was a fallback, but Harriet had the space, the time, and the devotion to keep Danny where she felt supported. Her voice wavering, Danny asked Harriet if she would mind being her legal foster parent. Harriet's heart soared as she replied, her tone gentle yet steady, "I'd be honored." Keeping Danny wasn't part of Harriet's original plan, but then again, her entire journey into fostering had been an unanticipated, beautiful turn. In that conversation, Harriet realized that while she was helping children find stability, they were equally gifting her renewed purpose. Each new day with Danny was an opportunity to love, learn, and grow, an opportunity to become the maternal figure Harriet never got to be in her younger years. The house found a new vibrancy. Danny's laughter echoing off the walls, Harriet's encouraging words when Danny's art project faced setbacks, and even the occasional dispute over chores or curfews. Each shared sunrise reminded Harriet that love didn't diminish when given away. Rather, it expanded, transforming emptiness into a sense of community and hope. Sometimes Harriet would stand in the hallway, glancing at the old photographs of her younger self with James, then at the Polaroids of the children she had fostered, gently pinned to the corkboard. Her eyes would brim with grateful tears. She realized that this was exactly what her husband had always wanted: a home that was truly lived in, a place where hearts could heal, and a refuge for anyone who needed it most. As the holidays approached, Harriet found herself preparing for another wave of foster children, short-term placements who needed shelter during the winter celebrations. This time, she felt no twinge of lonely dread. Instead, she and Danny painted paper snowflakes and hung vibrant strands of lights around the porch. They baked cookies and delivered them to the seniors at the community center where Harriet still volunteered. On Christmas Eve, Harriet and Danny greeted two new foster kids, both under 5, baffled by the confusion of a new home until they saw the plate of warm cookies and cocoa waiting on the kitchen table. Danny cradled the smaller one, softly telling him everything would be all right. Harriet's chest tightened with pride as she witnessed Danny's gentle approach and realized how far they both had come. In the flickering glow of the Christmas tree that night, Harriet recalled the promise James had once made about their house. May it be full of warmth, even on the coldest nights, and may everyone who enters find love. She felt his presence in the subtle corners of the room, almost as if he was smiling at what she had become. She had taken the raw ache of her widowhood and transformed it into a compassionate space where she gave love as freely as she breathed. And though James was gone, a part of him lived on in the kindness that Harriet offered to every child who crossed her threshold. Before drifting off to sleep, Harriet closed her eyes and listened to the hush of the winter night. Somewhere upstairs, the two young children were giggling, and Danny was telling them a story of her own invention. Harriet breathed in the sweetness of the moment. Her path had been unexpected, shaped by grief, but it had led her to open her heart to new possibilities. She had learned that hope was not merely an idea, it was a choice, made in small daily gestures, in the way she listened without judgment, comforted without hesitation, and gave love without condition. And in that quiet house, filled at last with the laughter and warmth she had once feared lost forever, Harriet Greenwood found that healing was a gentle process best shared. She embraced that truth, and in doing so, opened not just her home, but a future bursting with the promise of love and hope for all who dwelled there.